They say the past is like a shadow. No matter how fast you run, it always finds you. This is the story of Amaka, a woman who tried to escape her past, a woman who tried to rewrite her destiny, a woman who was cursed for leaving a world she never should have entered. What happens when secrets are exposed, when love turns to judgment, when a preacher, a husband, a man of God becomes the executioner? Buckle up, this one is going to haunt you. Amaka's world was one of survival. Her father disappeared before she could remember him. Her mother, lost in alcohol, was barely present. From childhood, she was more than a daughter. She was a provider. Before dawn, while the world slept, Amaka was awake, lighting a kerosene stove, boiling water, preparing food, combing her sister's hair, sending them to school with a smile she barely had the energy to fake. After school, while others played, she worked, sweeping floors, stocking shelves, running errands. The money was never enough. The landlord banged on their door. School fees loomed. Hunger became a familiar ache. Poverty was a relentless shadow. She finished high school, a miracle, got a job, but the pay vanished before it reached her hands. In Nigeria, the poor do not breathe easy, and Amaka, she was tired of fighting. Then came Chinwe, her childhood best friend, the one with money, the one who traveled, the one who never seemed to struggle. Amaka had always wondered how Chinwe did it, how she could afford gold jewelry, designer bags, and weekends in Lagos without ever complaining about work. Chinwe never mentioned a job, yet her nails were always done, her perfume always expensive, her clothes always new. One evening, Amaka went to visit Chinwe. She hadn't seen her in a while, and after another frustrating day at work, she just wanted to talk to someone who had made it, someone who wasn't struggling. They sat outside Chinwe's rented apartment, a place far nicer than anything Amaka could afford. The night air was cool, the street quiet, except for the occasional sound of a passing car. Chinwe leaned against the chair, sipping from a chilled bottle of soda. She looked at Amaka, studied her tired eyes, the exhaustion written all over her face. "Amaka, why do you do this to yourself?" Amaka sighed. "Do what? This suffering, this endless hustling, running up and down every day for small change. Look at you. You work so hard, yet you are still stuck in the same place. Is this how you want to live forever?" Amaka exhaled. "What choice do I have? I have sisters to feed, rent to pay. It's not like money falls from the sky, Chinwe. There is a way, Amaka, a way to make money, fast, no suffering, no stress." "How?" Amaka asked. Chinwe gave a small smile, as if she had been waiting for this moment. She reached for her phone, tapped on the screen a few times, then turned it toward Amaka. Amaka squinted at the screen, her brows knitting in confusion. It was a website, a profile, a picture of Chinwe, looking flawless, her makeup perfect, her pose alluring. But what caught Amaka's attention wasn't the picture, it was the number at the top. Millions of naira. Her heart skipped a beat. "What is this?" Amaka asked, a sinking feeling in her chest. "A website. Men pay to talk to me, to see me," Chinwe said casually, as if she were discussing the weather. Amaka recoiled. "Chinwe, you mean you're doing this kind of thing?" Chinwe smirked. "I mean, I have money. A lot of it. While you're here calculating how to stretch 500 naira for a week, I'm booking flights to Abuja for the weekend." Amaka shook her head, trying to process it. "I can't do this. I can't. It's shameful." "Shameful?" Chinwe scoffed. "Tell me, is it not more shameful to beg landlords for extra time to pay rent? Is it not shameful to borrow money to feed your sisters? You think suffering is honorable? My dear, money does not have morals." Amaka opened her mouth to argue, but no words came, because Chinwe was right. She was suffering, and no matter how hard she worked, she was always one step away from drowning in debt. Chinwe leaned in closer, her voice like silk. "Look, I won't force you, but tell me this. What's worse, doing this in secret and making money, or living in poverty for the rest of your life?" Amaka looked away, her chest tight. The thought disgusted her, but so did the idea of struggling forever. That night, she walked home in silence, Chinwe's words replaying in her mind. By morning, she had made a decision. A week later, she signed up. And the money? Oh, the money came like never before. At first, it felt like a dream. The money poured in like never before, more than she had ever seen in her life. Her sisters lacked for nothing. Groceries, school fees, new clothes, everything was paid. She finally had what she always wanted: security, but money does not erase competition. And in this world, competition was ruthless. New girls joined the site every day. Some were prettier, younger, bolder. Clients who once paid well now wanted more for less. The numbers started dropping. One evening, as Amaka scrolled through the site, she froze. Chinwe was ranking higher than her. For the first time in months, money was not rolling as it used to. Her phone rang. Chinwe. Her voice was calm, almost amused. You see it, don't you? Amaka exhaled. What did you do, Chinwe? There's a way to stay on top. Amaka's stomach twisted. She already knew where this was going. Chinwe, just say it. Chinwe hesitated, then whispered, I met someone. An old woman. She has helped many girls like us. Amaka frowned. Help them how? Chinwe's eyes gleamed. A charm, a protection, a power. She does a ritual for you. And after that, you become untouchable. Clients send you more money. No one competes with you. Amaka's fingers clenched around her phone. That sounds like juju. Chinwe smirked. And? Amaka swallowed hard. Chinwe's voice softened. Look at your life, Amaka. Look at your sisters. How long can you struggle? That night, she did not sleep. The next evening, she followed Chinwe to a small hidden house on the outskirts of the city. Inside, candles burned low, smoke curled in the air. An old woman sat on a woven mat, her face hidden by a red scarf. She smiled with missing teeth and tied a black thread around Amaka's wrist. She whispered, Your path is sealed now. No one will take what is yours. And when Amaka left that place, the shadows followed. At first, life was perfect. The money flowed like a river that never dried up. She no longer calculated every naira. She was elated that she could afford her sister's school fees without stress. For the first time in her life, she was free. She had everything she ever dreamed of. But money does not erase shame. Every night, as she lay in a bed softer than clouds, she felt empty. Her notifications dinged. Another client, another payment. She stared at the screen, at the huge balance in her account, yet her heart felt heavier than it ever had. She dreamed of shadows, of whispers in the night, of cold hands brushing her skin, of eyes watching her when no one was there, and the guilt never left. She had told herself, just a few months, just until I save enough. But months became years. And now she was trapped. Then one day, she made a decision. She would start a business, something real, something to replace the life she hated. She had always been good with hair. Even as a child, she would braid her sister's hair, style her mother's wigs. So she opened a salon. At first, it was small, a modest space with a few chairs and mirrors, but her clients loved her work. Soon the business boomed. The salon became a go-to place for high-end clients, women of status, society girls, brides. She was making good money, but she was still on the website because that money was easy, fast, addictive. And she told herself just a little longer. Until one afternoon, she was walking through the busy market, buying supplies for the salon. The sun was high, the air thick with voices, vendors shouting, people bargaining, the sounds of Lagos life. Then she heard something else, a song. It drifted from across the street, a deep, powerful chorus, voices rising in harmony. She turned. It was a church, a mega church, a glass cathedral, towering over the skyline, filled with thousands of worshippers. Outside, the giant LED screens projected a choir, their voices rolling like thunder. She felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. Her feet moved before she could stop them. She entered unnoticed and sat in the back row. The air was electric. The worship felt alive. Then the preacher spoke. You can have everything, money, power, status, but if you are not walking in the light, your soul will remain in darkness. Her breath caught in her throat. It felt like he was speaking directly to her. She kept coming back. Every Sunday, she listened, she prayed, she cried. Then one Sunday, she met Pastor Chris. It wasn't inside the church, it was at her salon. She was finishing up a client when she saw him walk in. Tall, well-dressed, charismatic. He greeted her warm but direct. "Are you Amaka?" Her heart pounded. "Yes, I know you." She froze. He saw the fear in her eyes and smiled. "Not like that. I've seen you at church, sitting in the back row every Sunday." She relaxed. "A little. I didn't think anyone noticed." God always notices. And for the first time, she talked, really talked about her childhood, her struggles, her pain. She didn't tell him everything, not about the website, not about Mama E's, but he listened. And when he spoke, his words felt like peace. Days turned to weeks, weeks turned to months, and she fell in love. She never thought love would find her. Not after everything, not after who she had been, but Pastor Chris saw only the woman she had become. When he proposed, she said yes without hesitation. She told him almost everything, her struggles, her pain, her past, everything, except for one thing. She never told him about the website. She never told him about Mama E's. She never told him about the curse, because it was in the past, wasn't it? It was over, wasn't it? The wedding was grand, a celebration unlike any other. The church overflowed with guests. The choir's voices rose like thunder, and the congregation erupted in joy. They had witnessed something beautiful. Pastor Chris, their beloved leader, marrying a woman of faith, a woman of strength. Amaka stood at the altar, dressed in white, smiling radiant, glowing with happiness. The rings were exchanged, the vows were spoken, the blessings were given, and in the eyes of everyone, it was a perfect union. As the newlyweds departed for their hotel, ready to begin their new life together, the guests slowly dispersed into the night. Deji, Pastor Chris's best friend and his best man, was among them. He was exhausted. It had been a long, emotional day filled with laughter, speeches, and prayers. By the time he got home, he barely changed before collapsing into bed. Sleep came quickly, but peace did not. Darkness surrounded him. A heavy mist curled around his feet, thick like smoke, yet weightless. And then, a voice, software whispering, calling his name, "Deji." He turned. A woman stood there. Her face was hidden beneath a dark veil, but he felt her gaze, cold, knowing. Her voice came again, distant yet piercing. "Your brother marries a liar, a woman who hides her past, a woman who will bring disgrace upon his name." His heart pounded. Something about the voice. It sent a chill through his very soul. The mist swirled around him. The air turned heavy. The woman stepped forward. "Check her past. She is not who she says she is." Her voice echoed. Deji jerked awake. His heart was still racing. Just a dream. It was just a dream. But why did it feel so real? He shook his head, reaching for his phone on the nightstand. A habit. He always checked social media before going back to sleep. Deji had posted a wedding picture on Facebook. The caption read, "What a blessed day." Pastor Chris and his beautiful bride, a union ordained by God, a match made in heaven, wishing them a lifetime of joy. The comments were filled with congratulations, prayers, and well wishes. Then a notification, a message request. Deji frowned. He tapped the inbox. The message was from a random profile. He clicked. "Brother, I know this woman. She's not who she says she is." Attached was a link. His stomach dropped. He hesitated, but curiosity got the best of him. He clicked, and then he saw it. A website, a profile, her face, Pamela. His blood ran cold. The past she had buried was no longer hidden. And as he sat there stunned, the message echoed in his mind. She is not who she says she is. Deji sat in his kitchen, staring at his phone. His hands trembled. His mind raced. The air felt thick. The words from the anonymous message replayed in his mind. Brother, I know this woman. She is not who she says she is. The website was still open. The video still playing. Amaka, or rather Pamela. His fingers hovered over the screen. He needed proof. He needed to be sure. He hit dial and whispered, Chris, I need to see you. Now. Chris's voice was groggy, confused. Brother, it's late. Can't this wait? No, it cannot. Fine, meet me in the lobby. Deji didn't wait. He grabbed his car keys and sped off into the quiet morning. He didn't even change out of his tracksuit. He sped through the quiet streets, the city still half asleep. The streets were mostly empty, the city still waking up, his hands shaking, his heart pounding, his mind racing. This wasn't just bad news. This wasn't just gossip. This was destruction. Chris stepped into the hotel lobby, dressed casually in sweatpants and a t-shirt, his face still marked with sleep. He looked tired, his wedding night still fresh in his mind. Brother, Deji breathed, swallowing the lump in his throat. I need to show you something. Chris frowned. What's wrong? Deji handed him the phone, a website, a profile, a face, his wife's face. Chris's body stiffened. The room seemed to tilt. He clicked the first video. At first it didn't feel real, but there she was, the woman he had held in his arms, the woman he had called wife. His hands went cold, his breath hitched, his heart shattered. He scrolled. More videos, more proof, more betrayal. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some cruel joke. This was real. Chris's voice was barely a whisper. Send them to me. Deji hesitated. Chris, think before you. Send them to me, Pastor Chris repeated, his voice sharper now, colder. With a sigh, Deji hit send. Chris turned without another word, walked to the elevator, pressed the button. As the doors closed, he knew what he had to do. Amaka was sitting on the bed, still in her white satin nightgown, scrolling through her phone. The moment she saw his face, she knew. Her stomach dropped. Her fingers froze. Chris, what's wrong? He didn't speak. He didn't blink. He just threw the phone at her. The screen lit up. The website, the videos, the proof. Amaka gasped. Her hands trembled as she reached for the phone. Her eyes widened in horror. Chris, I can explain. Explain? His voice was cold, empty. Go ahead, Amaka. Explain. Tears filled her eyes. I was desperate. I didn't know how else to survive. My mother was a drunk. My sisters needed food. So you sold yourself? His words cut like a blade. She shook her head violently. No, it wasn't like that. It was just videos, just images. I hated it, Chris. I left that life behind for you. He stepped closer, his jaw clenched. For me? His voice was low, dangerous. And when exactly were you going to tell me? She broke down. I was ashamed. I thought if I never spoke about it, if I just built a new life, it would disappear. But it never did, Chris. Every night I feared this moment. I feared losing you. Her voice cracked, raw with emotion. Please, don't let this define me. I am not that woman anymore. I love you. I love you more than anything. For a moment, just a moment, he hesitated. He could see it, the pain in her eyes, the regret, the love. But then he remembered the videos, the whispers that would come, the shame, the judgment, the disgrace. You made your choice, Amaka. He stepped back. Now I'll make mine. He turned around and walked out. Chris, she screamed, running after him. Please don't do this. But the door slammed shut and her world fell apart. Pastor Chris drove home, his mind spiraling. His anger wasn't just for Amaka. It was for himself, for being fooled, for being blind, for loving a woman who had dragged filth into his church. His fingers trembled as he picked up his phone. He opened the church WhatsApp group, a group of over 500 members, his congregation, his leaders, his followers. He clicked attach files, selected the videos, his heart hammered, his vision blurred, and then he typed, I married a woman I did not know. A woman with a past I could never have imagined. I was deceived. The church deserves to know the truth. He stared at the words. His chest tightened. Then, with one tap, he crucified his wife. The church WhatsApp group was on fire. Pastor Chris's wife is a fraud. She deceived the entire church. How can a woman with such a filthy past stand on our altar? Some defended her. Let him who is without sin cast the first stone. The church should be a place of healing, not judgment. Others were merciless. She deserves everything coming to her. A woman like that should never have been the wife of a pastor. Calls were made. Private conversations erupted. Within hours, the entire congregation knew. Then, Amaka's phone rang. It was her friend Omoni. She answered, her voice weak. Omoni? There was silence, a deep, painful silence. Then, Amaka, check the church group. Now. Amaka frowned. What do you mean? Just check. Omoni hung up. Confused, Amaka opened WhatsApp. The moment she saw it, her world stopped. Her hands trembled as she scrolled. Videos, screenshots, her past exposed for the entire church to see. And the comments, a disgrace. She made our pastor a fool. How could she even think she was worthy? Tears filled her eyes. Her breath came in gasps. Her phone buzzed again. Her sister. She hesitated, then picked up. Rita. Her voice was barely above a whisper. The words on the other end cut through her like a blade. We saw everything. You embarrassed us, Amaka. Do you know what people are saying about us? Amaka broke down. Please, I didn't mean for this to happen. I was trying to protect you. Her sister's voice was sharp, filled with pain. Protect us? You have ruined us. The line went dead. Amaka dropped the phone. She covered her face with her hands, her sobs shaking her body. She had lost everything, her marriage, her church, her family, her dignity. The weight of it all crushed her. Then the thought came, maybe this was the only way out. Maybe this was the only way to stop the pain. She wiped her tears, took a deep breath, and reached for a pen and paper. Her hand shook as she wrote. Chris, you crucified me before the world. You could have confronted me in private, but you let them destroy me. I loved you, but you chose to shame me instead. To my sisters, I did everything for you. I wanted you to have the life I never had, but I have become your disgrace. I am sorry for the shame I brought you. To the church, I believed in you. I thought you were a place of healing, but now I see. You only accept the redeemed if they have no past. I was never good enough. No matter how much I tried, I carried my past like a curse, and when I finally thought I had escaped it, I was crucified for it. I am tired. I am done fighting. Maybe now I will finally have peace. A final tear dropped onto the paper. She reached for the bottle of pills. She whispered, I'm sorry. The senior pastor knelt in his prayer room, eyes shut tight, his heart heavy. His hands trembled as he whispered words of intercession. Then, a sudden stillness, a whisper in his spirit. Go to her. His eyes snapped open, his chest tightened. He reached for his phone, his fingers unsteady, and dialed Deji. Meet me at the hotel, now. Deji hesitated. Pastor, what's happening? No time to explain, just go. Without hesitation, Deji grabbed his keys and rushed out. The hotel hallway was quiet. Too quiet. The staff stood outside room 307, knocking, then pounding. Miss Amaka, are you inside? No answer. The senior pastor and Deji arrived. Their footsteps were hurried, their expressions tense. How long has she been inside? The pastor asked. Since yesterday. She hasn't come out. Deji's stomach twisted. He pounded on the door. Amaka, open up! Silence. A chill ran down his spine. Break it down, the pastor ordered. The hotel staff hesitated. Now! Deji shouted. With one powerful shove, the door burst open. And there she was, Amaka, lying on the bed, still, unmoving. A pill bottle lay tipped over beside her. A half-crumpled suicide note clutched in her fingers. Her chest rose and fell, barely. She's still breathing, Deji gasped, rushing to her side. The senior pastor pressed a firm hand against her forehead, whispering a desperate prayer. Call an ambulance, now. Machines beeped. Doctors moved quickly. The battle to save Amaka's life had begun. Outside, the waiting room was heavy with silence. The senior pastor sat still, hands clasped, eyes closed in deep prayer. His lips moved softly, whispering words only God could hear. Beside him, Deji sat hunched forward, elbows on his knees, his hands gripping his head. His eyes were red, swollen. Then the doors swung open. Chris rushed in. His clothes were wrinkled, his face pale, his breath short. He had driven like a madman, his heart pounding in his chest the entire way. "Where is she?" His voice was hoarse. A doctor stepped forward, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "Sir, we're doing everything we can." Chris barely nodded. His eyes searched the room. They landed on Deji, his brother, his friend. But this time, there was no anger. There was no one to blame. His hands clenched into fists, his throat tight. The weight of what he had done crushed him. Then he noticed the senior pastor. The man of God hadn't moved. He remained on his knees, his voice barely above a whisper as he prayed. Chris's breath hitched, his legs weakened, his chest ached. Guilt, shame, fear, everything hit him at once. Slowly, painfully, he sank to his knees. His head dropped, his hands trembled, and for the first time since it all began, he prayed. The waiting room remained still. Chris knelt, head bowed, hands gripping his thighs. The only sound was the senior pastor's whispered prayers. Deji stared at the floor, unmoving, his fingers dug into his scalp, his mind spiraling. Then, the double doors swung open. The doctor walked out. His face was unreadable, his hands folded in front of him. The silence stretched. Chris shot to his feet. "Doctor?" His voice cracked. A single word, yet filled with so much weight. The doctor exhaled. "I'm sorry." Time stopped. Chris staggered backward. His chest tightened. His breath came in short, uneven gasps. Deji's hands fell to his lap. His head tilted upward, eyes empty. The senior pastor remained still, but his lips stopped moving. Silence. A deep, suffocating silence. Chris shook his head. "No." The doctor placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "She didn't make it." Chris ripped away. "No, you're lying." His voice cracked. "She was breathing. She was fine." The doctor shook his head. "We did everything we could." Chris's chest rose and fell rapidly. His world was unraveling. The senior pastor finally stood. His voice was deep, measured. "She's gone, Chris." And just like that, Chris broke. A sharp, raw sob tore from his throat. His knees buckled and he collapsed into a chair, his face buried in his hands. Deji stared blankly at the wall, his eyes hollow, his mind numb. The senior pastor simply stood there, his face unreadable, his hands slowly clasping together. A long pause. Then the church bells rang in the distance, slow, mournful. By Wednesday evening, the mega church was filled beyond capacity. Yet there was no excitement, no energy, no joyful singing, no clapping of hands, no shouts of hallelujah. Only silence, a silence thick with regret, heavy with shame. The senior pastor stepped onto the altar, his Bible resting before him. His voice, usually strong and commanding, now carried the weight of sorrow. "We failed her." The words echoed through the grand cathedral. "We speak of grace, yet when she needed it most, we turned away." His eyes moved over the congregation. Some lowered their heads, others wept quietly. Chris sat in the front row, his face hollow, drained of all emotion. Since Monday morning, when he last saw Amaka's lifeless body, he had barely spoken. The reality of his actions had settled deep into his bones. The senior pastor exhaled, then opened his Bible. His fingers trembled as he turned the pages. Let us read from John 8:7. "He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her." The congregation stilled. The senior pastor's voice grew heavier. How quickly we cast our stones, how easily we forget that we too are sinners in need of grace. His gaze locked onto Chris. "Pastor Chris, you exposed your wife. But did you ever pray for her healing?" Chris's throat tightened. "Deji, you spread the secret, but did you ever offer grace?" Deji wiped his face, silent. The senior pastor turned to the congregation. "Church, you judged her, but did you ever remind her that God redeems?" A murmur spread through the crowd. Some sobbed, some shifted in their seats, others simply stared at the floor, ashamed. The senior pastor closed his Bible. His voice softened. "Pastor Chris, you must step away from the pulpit." Chris's breath hitched. "For 1 year you will not preach, you will not lead." A hushed gasp rippled through the congregation. "Instead, you will sit among the people. You will listen. You will learn. You will heal." Chris nodded weakly. There was no fight left in him. Slowly, he bowed his head. He did not leave. He remained seated among the congregation, among those he had once preached to. The senior pastor watched him in silence. Then he spoke one final time. "The past never forgets, but judgment without mercy is a sin of its own."